The cold Montana wind howled through the cracks of Nathan Sinclair's barn as the first light of dawn crept over the Bitterroot Mountains. Autumn of 1885 had arrived with a vengeance, bringing an early frost that threatened both crops and souls foolish enough to be caught outdoors overnight. Nathan pulled his sheepskin coat tighter as he trudged from his cabin to the stable, coffee steam rising from the tin mug in his gloved hand. The 32-year-old rancher hadn't expected much from this Thursday morning, just the usual chores, before heading into town for supplies. But life had a way of throwing surprises at a man when he least expected them. The moment Nathan pushed open the stable door, his horse Rusty nickered softly, but something else caught his attention. A small disturbance in the hay pile at the far end of the stable. His free hand instinctively moved to the revolver on his hip as he approached cautiously, setting his coffee down on a barrel. "Who's there?" he called out, voice firm despite the early hour. "I'm armed, so you'd best show yourself." The hay shifted and a woman emerged, wrapped in a threadbare coat far too thin for Montana's cruel autumn. Her auburn hair was tangled with straw, her face smudged with dirt, but even in the dim light, Nathan could see she was beautiful and terrified. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I meant no harm. I was just trying to get out of the cold." Nathan relaxed his stance but kept his hand near his pistol. "You picked a poor night to be sleeping rough. Who are you and what are you doing in my stable?" "My name is Julia O'Connor," she said, slowly rising to her feet. "I've been traveling, looking for work. I didn't think anyone would mind if I stayed just one night." Nathan noticed her shivering despite her attempts to hide it. Her lips had a bluish tinge that spoke of the dangerous cold, and something in her eyes, a mixture of pride and desperation, stirred something within him. "My bed is warmer than this hay," he said gruffly, immediately regretting his phrasing when her eyes widened in alarm. "That's not what I meant," he added hastily. "I've got a spare room in the house. You can warm up there, get something hot to eat, and then be on your way." Julia hesitated, clearly weighing her options: trust this stranger or risk freezing in the increasingly bitter Montana autumn. "I don't take charity," she said, but her body betrayed her as another violent shiver ran through her. "It's not charity," Nathan replied. "It's common decency. Even in these parts, we don't let folks freeze to death if we can help it." He paused, studying her. "Besides, you look like you could use a meal." After another moment of hesitation, Julia nodded, gathering her small cloth bag, the sum total of her possessions, it seemed, and followed Nathan out of the stable. The cabin was modest but solid, a testament to Nathan's craftsmanship. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and the warmth hit Julia like a physical force as they entered. She couldn't suppress a sigh of relief as the door closed behind them, shutting out the biting wind. "Sit," Nathan said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I'll make you something hot to eat." Julia sank into the chair, her body still quivering from the cold. "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair." "Nathan Sinclair," he supplied, moving to the stove where a pot of beans had been simmering overnight. "Most folks just call me Nate." "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair," she said formally, keeping her distance despite the kindness he had shown. "I won't impose on your hospitality for long." Nathan spooned beans into a bowl, cut a thick slice of bread, and placed it in front of her. "Eat first, talk later." Julia didn't need to be told twice. She ate with careful restraint despite what must have been tremendous hunger, and Nathan found himself wondering what circumstances had brought this clearly educated woman to sleeping in his stable. When she had finished, he poured them both coffee and sat across from her. "Now, Miss O'Connor, Mrs.," she corrected quietly, "though I suppose it doesn't matter any more." Nathan raised an eyebrow but didn't press. "Mrs. O'Connor, then. What brings you all the way out here?" Nearest town is Bonner's Ferry, and that's a fair distance on foot. Julia's hands tightened around her coffee cup. I was heading for Missoula. I heard there might be work there for a schoolteacher. You're a teacher. I was back in Chicago. Her gaze dropped to her hands. Circumstances changed. Nathan nodded, recognizing the look of someone running from something or someone. He'd seen it enough times since settling in Montana Territory 10 years ago. People came west for all sorts of reasons, not all of them voluntary. Well, Mrs. O'Connor, you're welcome to stay the night in the spare room. Tomorrow, if you're set on Missoula, I can take you part of the way. I'm heading to Bonner's Ferry for supplies. Relief washed over her face, quickly replaced by suspicion. Why would you help me? You don't know anything about me. Nathan stood and put more wood on the fire before answering. 10 years ago, when I first came out here, a stranger gave me shelter during a blizzard. Saved my life. Figured I'd pass on the favor when needed. Julia seemed to accept this explanation. I'm grateful, Mr. Sinclair. Just Nate is fine. He moved to a chest in the corner and pulled out a clean flannel shirt and a pair of pants. These'll be too big, but they're dry. The spare room's through there. There's water for washing up. I've got chores to tend to, so you'll have your privacy. He left her then, returning to his stable to finish the morning tasks. By the time he returned to the cabin for lunch, he found Julia had not only changed into his 2 large clothes, but had also cleaned the kitchen, and was in the process of mending one of his shirts that had been thrown over a chair awaiting repair. You didn't have to do that, he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. It's the least I could do. Julia tied off the thread and bit it with her teeth. I don't like being in debt. It's not a debt, Nathan insisted, but he could see she wasn't going to be persuaded otherwise. They shared a simple lunch of jerky and more beans, and Julia gradually began to thaw, not just physically but emotionally as well. She spoke of her teaching in Chicago, carefully avoiding any mention of a husband or the circumstances that had brought her west. Nathan didn't pry, offering instead tales of his own journey from Boston to Montana, the hardships and rewards of ranching, and his hopes to expand his modest herd come spring. By evening, a tentative rapport had formed between them. Nathan found himself enjoying the company more than he'd expected. It had been a long time since he'd shared his table with anyone, let alone someone who could converse about books and ideas beyond cattle prices and weather patterns. After dinner, Julia insisted on washing the dishes while Nathan tended to the evening chores. When he returned, he found her staring into the fire, lost in thought. Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. O'Connor. She startled slightly, then smiled the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. Just Julia, please. And they're not worth even that, I'm afraid. Nathan settled into his chair across from her. Everyone's thoughts are worth something, especially those that put such a troubled look on a person's face. Julia's smile faded. I was thinking about tomorrow, about what awaits in Missoula, if anything. You're worried there won't be work. I'm worried about a great many things, Mr. Sinclair. Nate, she corrected herself. Teaching positions aren't easy to come by, especially for a woman with complicated circumstances. Nathan studied her carefully. The firelight cast shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheekbones, the determined set of her jaw. She was running from something, that much was clear. But whatever her past, she had the look of someone who fought hard for what she believed in. What if you didn't go to Missoula just yet? The words were out before he'd fully considered them. Julia looked up, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, winter's coming on fast. Travel will be difficult soon, and well, I could use some help around here. He gestured vaguely around the cabin. Place could use a woman's touch, and I've got more than enough work with the cattle. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Sinclair? Julia's voice was cautious. I suppose I am. Room and board plus a fair wage, just until spring if that's what you want. By then, you'll have some savings and traveling will be easier. Julia was quiet for a long moment, weighing his offer against whatever alternatives she saw for herself. Why would you do this for a stranger, a woman you found sleeping in your hay? Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Because I know what it's like to be alone in a strange place, Mrs. O'Connor, and because, frankly, I could use the help. My mother always said I was a disaster at keeping house, and she wasn't wrong. A small smile tugged at Julia's lips. Well, I can't argue with that. Your mending pile is frightful. Nathan laughed, a rich sound that seemed to surprise even him. Is that a yes, then? Until spring, Julia agreed, but her eyes held a wariness that suggested she didn't fully trust this stroke of good fortune. And I'll earn my keep, make no mistake. I never doubted it for a moment, Nathan replied, feeling an unexpected warmth spread through him at the thought of having her presence brighten his lonely cabin through the long Montana winter. Neither of them could have predicted how those months would change them both, or the dangers that would find them before the first spring flowers pushed through the snow-covered ground. The following day, Nathan and Julia settled into an uneasy rhythm. He showed her around the small ranch, the barn with its 6 stalls, currently housing 3 horses, the chicken coop with a dozen laying hens, the smokehouse where his supply of venison and beef hung, and the root cellar stocked with potatoes, carrots, and preserves to last through winter. It's not much, he said, almost apologetically, but it's mine, paid for free and clear last year. It's impressive, Julia replied, and her sincerity was evident. To build all this yourself, you should be proud. Nathan felt an unfamiliar flush of pleasure at her words. Well, I had help with some of it. Neighbors pitch in for barn raisings and such out here. Communities small but solid. Will I meet these neighbors? Julia asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. Eventually, I expect. Nearest is the Miller family, about 5 miles east. Then there's old Jim Peterson to the north and the Wilson place beyond that. Nathan watched her carefully. Something troubling you about that? Julia forced a smile. Not at all, I just prefer to keep to myself these days. Before Nathan could inquire further, they were interrupted by the distant sound of approaching hoofbeats. Julia tensed visibly, her face paling. That'll be Sheriff Dawson, Nathan said, puzzled by her reaction. Comes by every few weeks to check on the outlying homesteads, pass on any news. Julia's hands twisted in the fabric of her borrowed shirt. Perhaps I should go inside. No need for that. Roy's a good man. Known him since I first settled here. Nathan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, feeling her tremble beneath his touch. Julia, is there something I should know? Something I might need to protect you from? Her eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. I'm not a criminal, if that's what you're asking. I wasn't. The sheriff's horse crested the hill before Julia could say more. Roy Dawson was a weathered man in his 50s, with a silver mustache and sharp eyes that missed little. He dismounted with the easy grace of a lifelong horseman and approached with a friendly wave. "Morning, Nate," he called, then noticed Julia. His eyebrows rose slightly. "Madam." "Roy," Nathan greeted him warmly. "This is Mrs. Julia O'Connor. She's staying on through winter, helping with the place." The sheriff's gaze was appraising but not unkind as he tipped his hat to Julia. "Pleasure, madam. Don't often see new faces out this way, especially with winter coming on." "The pleasure is mine, Sheriff," Julia replied, her voice steady despite the tension Nathan could still feel in her posture. "What brings you our way, Roy?" Nathan asked, steering the conversation away from Julia. "Just making my rounds." "Thought you'd want to know there's been some trouble over near Helena. Stage robbery last week, 2 passengers killed. The sheriff's expression grew grave. The Blackwood gang again, by all accounts. Nathan frowned. I thought they were operating further south down Wyoming way. Seems they've moved their hunting grounds. Word is they're headed this direction, so keep your eyes open. Dawson glanced at Julia. Might want to be extra careful, what with a lady on the property now. We'll be fine, Nathan assured him, though the news was troubling. The Blackwood gang had a notorious reputation for brutality, even by outlaw standards. After declining an offer of coffee, the sheriff departed with a final warning to stay vigilant. As his horse disappeared over the hill, Nathan turned to find Julia white-faced, her composure finally cracking. "Julia, what is it?" he asked, genuinely concerned now. She took a shuddering breath. "I should leave. I'm putting you in danger by staying here." Nathan gently guided her to a stump where they both sat. "Now, why would you say that?" "The Blackwoods are a menace to everyone in these parts, not just because of you." Julia stared at her hands, clenched tightly in her lap. "My husband," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "My late husband was Daniel O'Connor." The name meant nothing to Nathan, and his confusion must have shown on his face. "He was a banker in Chicago," she continued. 6 months ago, he refused to cooperate with some men who wanted to use his bank for illegal purposes. They shot him in his office, in front of me." Nathan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "These men, they were part of the Blackwood gang," Julia nodded slowly. "I testified against them. 2 were hanged, but the rest, including Elias Blackwood himself, escaped before they could be arrested." Her eyes, when they met his, were filled with a deep, haunting fear. "They swore they'd find me. That's why I left Chicago, why I've been traveling west. I thought I'd gone far enough, but if they're in Montana. Why didn't you tell me this before?" Nathan asked, not accusingly but with genuine concern. "Because I've learned that knowledge is dangerous," Julia replied simply. "Everyone who tried to help me in the beginning, they suffered for it. I couldn't bear to put another person at risk." Nathan considered this, the implications settling heavily between them. "Well, it's too late now. I'm already involved." He stood, decision made. "And I'm not the type to turn away someone in need, especially not with winter coming and outlaws on the prowl. But no buts, Mrs. O'Connor. You're staying, at least until we figure out a safer plan." His voice softened at her evident distress. "We're miles from anywhere out here. If the Blackwoods are around, you're safer with me than traveling alone." Julia looked as though she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion and the logic of his words seemed to win out. "Very well," she conceded. "But at the first sign of trouble, I'm gone. I won't have your blood on my hands, too." Nathan nodded, respecting her determination even as he silently vowed not to let it come to that. He'd fought hard for his piece of Montana, and he wasn't about to let any gang of cutthroats drive him or Julia from it. As they walked back to the cabin, Nathan found himself studying Julia with new eyes. Her courage in the face of such danger impressed him deeply. Most women, most men, for that matter, would have crumbled under the weight of what she'd endured. Yet here she was, still fighting, still determined to forge a new life despite the shadows pursuing her. It was a quality Nathan couldn't help but admire, even as he worried about what her presence might bring to his peaceful homestead. The days began to fall into a rhythm as October deepened. Julia proved to be an invaluable help around the ranch, not just with housekeeping but with the animals as well. She had a natural way with the horses that surprised Nathan, and even his most temperamental mare, Willow, seemed to calm under her gentle hands. "Where'd you learn to handle horses like that?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Julia mending a tear in one of his work shirts while he cleaned his rifle. "Didn't think Chicago bankers' wives spent much time in stables." A small smile crossed Julia's face. "I grew up on a small farm in Pennsylvania. My father raised draft horses. I could ride before I could walk, according to him." "How'd you end up in Chicago, then?" Julia's hand stilled for a moment. "I wanted to teach. There was a good normal school in the city, so I went there for training. That's where I met Daniel. He was a guest lecturer on financial matters." Her smile turned sad. "He was a kind man, quiet, studious. Nothing like my father, who was all bluster and noise." Nathan watched the firelight play across her features. "You loved him." "I did," she said simply. "Not in the wild, passionate way poets write about, but in a steady, comfortable way. He was good to me." Her eyes met Nathan's. "What about you? No Mrs. Sinclair waiting somewhere?" Nathan shook his head. "Never found the right woman, or maybe never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." He ran a cloth along the barrel of his Winchester. "Came west after the war, fought for the Union, and just kept moving until I found this valley. Something about it felt like home." "It is beautiful," Julia agreed. "Even now, with winter coming." "Especially now," Nathan countered. "Wait till you see these mountains after the first real snow. Like God himself painted them." The conversation lulled into comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the soft sounds of their work. Nathan found himself increasingly aware of Julia's presence, the delicate curve of her neck as she bent over her sewing, the stray curl that escaped her practical bun, the way her lips pressed together in concentration. It had been a long time since he'd shared his space with anyone, let alone a woman. The cabin felt different with her in it, warmer somehow, and not just from the extra cooking fires. There was a comfort in her presence that both pleased and unsettled him. When Julia yawned, Nathan realized how late it had grown. "You should get some rest," he said, setting aside his cleaned rifle. "Early start tomorrow if we're going to finish bringing in the last of the hay before that storm hits." Julia nodded, gathering her sewing. "Good night, Nate," she said, using his familiar name for the first time. She paused at the door to her room. "Thank you for everything." "Nothing to thank me for," he replied gruffly, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation, a single man and a widowed woman living under the same roof, miles from the nearest neighbor. In town, tongues would surely wag. Out here, though, survival took precedence over social niceties. Still, as he banked the fire for the night, Nathan couldn't help but wonder what Julia's presence in his life might mean beyond the coming winter. The predicted storm arrived with a vengeance 2 days later, howling down from the mountains with a fury that trapped them indoors for nearly a week. The forced confinement might have been awkward, but Nathan found himself enjoying Julia's company more than he'd anticipated. She was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. Yet she listened to his perspectives with genuine interest, rather than mere politeness. On the third day of the storm, as wind rattled the shutters and snow piled against the doors, Nathan pulled a battered chess set from a trunk. "You play?" he asked, setting up the carved pieces on the kitchen table. Julia's eyes lit up. "My father taught me. Though I warn you, I was considered quite formidable in Chicago literary circles." Nathan grinned. "Is that a challenge, Mrs. O'Connor?" "Take it as you will, Mr. Sinclair." What followed was the most enjoyable chess match Nathan could remember playing. Julia was indeed skilled, her strategy both aggressive and thoughtful. When she finally checkmated him after a long, hard-fought game, her triumphant smile was so genuine and joyful that Nathan found himself laughing despite his defeat. "Well played," he conceded, helping her reset the board. Another. They played late into the night, their games interspersed with conversation and comfortable silences. Nathan learned about Julia's childhood in rural Pennsylvania, her dreams of running her own school someday, her favorite authors and poems. In turn, he shared stories of his travels west, the characters he'd met along the way, his time in the Union Army during the war, and his hopes for expanding the ranch. It was the most he'd talked to anyone in years, and Nathan was surprised by how natural it felt to open up to her. As the storm raged outside, a different kind of warmth grew within the cabin, a sense of connection neither of them had anticipated. Nathan found himself watching Julia when she wasn't looking, admiring the grace of her movements, the intelligence in her eyes, the quiet strength that had carried her through unimaginable tragedy. For her part, Julia seemed to relax more each day, the haunted look gradually fading from her expression. She laughed more freely, moved about the cabin with increasing confidence, and even began to sing softly while working old folk songs that reminded Nathan of his mother. By the time the storm finally broke, something had shifted between them. Neither acknowledged it directly, but there was a new ease in their interactions, a deeper trust and understanding. The morning after the storm, they emerged to a transformed world. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and glittering in the clear sunlight. The air was bitter cold but invigorating after days of confinement. "It's magnificent," Julia breathed, her face flushed with cold and wonder as she took in the vista of snow-covered mountains rising behind the ranch. Nathan, watching her rather than the scenery, nodded. "Told you it was something special." They spent the day digging out paths to the barn and chicken coop, checking on the animals and assessing any damage from the storm. To Nathan's relief, everything had weathered well, a testament to his careful preparation. Working together, they fell into an easy rhythm. Julia was stronger than she looked, tackling her share of the labor without complaint. By sunset, they were both exhausted but satisfied with their progress. As they sat down to a hearty dinner of venison stew, Nathan made a decision. "I need to ride into Bonner's Ferry tomorrow," he said. "Check on things, pick up mail, see if there's any news we should know about." Julia's expression clouded. "The Blackwoods, among other things. We've been cut off for nearly a week. Need to know what's happening out there." "I'll come with you," Julia offered, but Nathan shook his head. "Roads will be treacherous after the storm. Better if I go alone, travel light and fast." Seeing her concern, he added, "You'll be safer here. Cabin's well stocked, and you know how to use the shotgun if needed." Julia didn't look convinced. "I don't like the idea of you traveling alone in these conditions, especially with outlaws about." Nathan was touched by her concern. "I've made this ride in worse weather. I'll be fine." She conceded reluctantly, but insisted on preparing extra food for his journey and checking over his winter gear herself. Her attention to these details, the way she fussed over the quality of his gloves and the warmth of his coat, stirred something deep within Nathan, something he hadn't felt in a very long time. That night, as they sat by the fire one last time before his departure, Nathan found himself reluctant to leave, even for a short journey. The cabin had never felt so much like home as it did with Julia in it. "I should be back by nightfall tomorrow," he told her. "If not, don't worry. Might need to stay in town if the weather turns." Julia nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Be careful, Nate, please." "Always am," he assured her, though they both knew the dangers of winter travel in Montana territory were not to be taken lightly. Morning came cold and clear. Nathan saddled Rusty at first light while Julia packed his saddlebags with food and extra clothing. Her hands lingered on his arm as she handed him the bags. "Promise you'll be careful," she said again, her voice tight with worry. On impulse, Nathan took her gloved hand in his. "I promise." "And Julia, lock the doors while I'm gone. Keep the shotgun close." She nodded, and for a moment they stood there, hands clasped, something unspoken passing between them. Then Nathan mounted and rode away, the snow crunching beneath Rusty's hooves. When he looked back at the edge of the property, Julia still stood in the yard, a solitary figure against the white landscape, watching him until he disappeared over the ridge. The ride to Bonner's Ferry was slow but uneventful. The town itself was quiet under its blanket of snow, with only a few hardy souls venturing out to the general store or saloon. Nathan collected his mail, purchased a few supplies they were running low on, and then headed to the sheriff's office for news. Roy Dawson was warming his hands by the stove when Nathan entered. "Nate, didn't expect to see anyone from your direction after that storm." "Roads aren't too bad," Nathan replied, accepting the cup of coffee the sheriff offered. "Any word on the Blackwoods?" Dawson's expression darkened. "Nothing good. They hit a homestead near Thompson Falls 3 days ago, killed the man, took his horses and valuables." He leaned forward, voice lowering despite the empty office. "Word is they're asking questions about a woman, banker's widow from Chicago." Nathan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "They're still looking for her. Seems so. Offering good money for information, too." The sheriff studied Nathan carefully. "Your Mrs. O'Connor wouldn't happen to be from Chicago, would she?" For a moment, Nathan considered lying, but Roy Dawson was too smart for that, and potentially too valuable an ally. "She is," he admitted. "Her husband was killed by the Blackwoods for refusing to launder their money. She testified against some of the gang." Dawson whistled low. "That's a dangerous secret to be keeping, Nate. She didn't ask for this trouble, just trying to start a new life. Aren't we all?" The sheriff poured more coffee. "Well, you should know they've been seen heading north. Could be coincidence, could be they've caught her trail somehow." Nathan's jaw tightened. "How many in their party?" "Reports say 6, including Elias himself. Mean bunch, every one of them." Dawson gave Nathan a hard look. "You thinking of standing against them? Because that would be suicide, even for a man with your background." "I'm thinking of protecting what's mine," Nathan replied, not fully realizing the implications of his words until they were out. The sheriff caught it, his weathered face softening slightly. "Ah, it's like that, is it?" Nathan didn't answer directly. "Would the law help if they came calling?" "You know I would, Nate, but I'm one man. By the time I could gather a posse and reach your place." He left the grim possibility unspoken. "I understand." Nathan finished his coffee and stood. "Thanks for the information, Roy. I'd best get back before dark." "Nate." The sheriff's voice stopped him at the door. "Be careful. Elias Blackwood isn't just another outlaw. He enjoys hurting people, and he never forgets a grudge." With that sobering warning, Nathan departed, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. The supplies he'd come for now seemed trivial compared to the threat moving steadily toward his home toward Julia. The ride back was tense, Nathan pushing Rusty harder than he should have in the snowy conditions. Every instinct told him to hurry, to get back to the cabin before anything could happen. He'd left Julia alone, vulnerable, when enemies might be closer than he'd realized. It was late afternoon when he crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch, and relief flooded through him at the sight of smoke rising steadily from the chimney. Everything looked peaceful, undisturbed. Still, he approached cautiously, scanning the surrounding trees and hills for any sign of intruders. Nathan had just reached the barn when the cabin door opened and Julia emerged, shotgun in hand. When she recognized him, her face lit up with relief, and she rushed forward as he dismounted. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was starting to worry." "Everything all right here?" Nathan asked, quickly unsaddling Rusty and brushing him down. "Fine, quiet." Julia helped him carry the supplies inside. "What about town? Any news?" Nathan considered how much to tell her. not wanting to frighten her unnecessarily, but knowing she deserved the truth. Once they were inside with the door firmly closed, he related what the sheriff had told him. Julia's face paled, but she remained composed. "They're coming this way," she said, not a question but a flat statement, possibly. Nathan stoked the fire, adding more wood against the encroaching evening chill. "Roy says they've been seen heading north. Then I should leave. Tonight they're after me, not you. And go where?" Nathan challenged. "In winter, with no horse, no supplies. That's certain death, Julia. Better than bringing death to your door." Her voice rose with emotion. "I won't have another man's blood on my hands because of me. I can't." Nathan moved to her then, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Listen to me. First, we don't know for certain they're coming here. Second, even if they are, they won't find this place easily. It's remote, off the main trails. And third," his voice softened, "I'm not letting you face this alone. Not now, not ever." Julia looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else, something that made Nathan's heart beat faster. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk your life for someone you barely know?" The answer came to him with surprising clarity. "Because in the few weeks you've been here, this place has finally felt like home. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because—" he stopped, suddenly unsure if he was saying too much. Julia's hand came up to rest against his chest, above his heart. "Because what, Nathan?" The sound of his full name on her lips broke something loose within him. "Because I'm falling in love with you," he admitted, the words rough with emotion. "And that's worth fighting for." For a long moment, Julia said nothing, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in a kiss so gentle it made his heart ache. "I thought it was just me," she whispered against his mouth. "I thought I was a fool for feeling this way so soon after Daniel." Nathan pulled her closer, one hand cradling the back of her head. "Not a fool," he murmured. "Never that." They stood there in the firelight, holding each other as if they could ward off the dangers of the outside world through sheer force of will. And for that moment, perhaps they could. "We'll face this together," Nathan promised. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Julia nodded against his chest, and he felt her resolve strengthen along with his own. The Blackwood gang might be coming, but they would find no easy prey at the Sinclair ranch, only a man and woman determined to defend their chance at happiness, no matter the cost. The next few days passed in a state of heightened vigilance. Nathan reinforced the cabin's defenses, boarding up the smaller windows and positioning furniture to create barriers if needed. He inventoried his ammunition, cleaned all his firearms, and made sure Julia was comfortable handling not just the shotgun but his spare revolver as well. To his surprise, she took to the lessons with grim determination and no small amount of skill. "My father believed daughters should know how to protect themselves as well as sons," she explained as she reloaded the revolver with steady hands. "I never thought I'd need those lessons, but here we are." Despite the looming threat, or perhaps because of it, their evenings together took on a special sweetness. They talked long into the night, sharing hopes and fears, gradually filling in the gaps of each other's lives. Julia spoke more openly about Daniel, about the guilt she carried for his death, while Nathan confessed his own demons from the war and his years of drifting afterward. "I never told anyone about Springfield," he admitted one night as they lay on a bearskin rug before the fire, Julia's head resting on his chest. "How I froze when the Confederate charge came. How Thaddeus Jenkins stepped in front of me and took the bullet meant for me." Julia's arm tightened around him. "You were just a boy. I was 18, old enough to know better." Nathan stared into the flames. "I've spent my life trying to make up for that moment of cowardice." "Is that why you're so determined to stand against the Blackwoods, to prove something?" Nathan considered her question. Maybe at first, but not anymore. He turned to look at her, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. Now I'm fighting for a future, our future if you'll have it. Julia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I want that more than anything, she whispered. But I'm afraid, Nate. So afraid of losing you just when I've found you. You won't lose me, he promised, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Nathan rose early to check on the animals, leaving Julia sleeping peacefully. He just finished feeding the horses when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh hoof prints in the snow, circling the perimeter of his property. Someone had been watching the ranch. Nathan hurried back to the cabin, fighting to keep his expression neutral as he entered. Julia looked up from the stove where she was preparing breakfast, her smile fading as she read his face. "What is it?" "Tracks," he said simply. "Fresh ones. Riders, at least 3, maybe 4. The color drained from Julia's face, but her voice remained steady. "The Blackwoods, can't say for certain, but they didn't approach the cabin, just circled and left, headed east from what I could tell." Nathan hung his coat by the door, his mind racing. Could be just passing through, could be scouting. "What do we do?" Nathan met her gaze, seeing the fear there but also the resolve. "We prepare," he said, "and we wait." They spent the day in tense readiness, keeping weapons close at hand. Nathan considered sending Julia to town with a message for the sheriff, but rejected the idea the roads were too dangerous, and he couldn't bear to be separated from her now. As dusk approached, Nathan made a difficult decision. "We need to move the horses," he told Julia. "If they come back, the animals will be the first targets. Where can we take them?" "There's a box canyon about a mile west. Hard to find if you don't know it's there. We can leave them with some hay. They'll be sheltered from the wind, at least for a night or 2. Julia nodded and immediately began helping him prepare. They worked quickly in the fading light, leading the horses through the snow to the hidden canyon. Nathan showed Julia how to secure them with long leads that would allow them to graze but not wander far. "Should we stay here with them?" Julia asked as they finished. Nathan shook his head. "Cabin's more defensible, and I don't want to be caught in the open if they come back." They returned to the ranch as full darkness settled over the valley. The cabin seemed especially vulnerable now, a lone light in the vast wilderness. Nathan built up the fire, then methodically checked and rechecked their defenses. Julia prepared a simple dinner, but neither had much appetite. They sat close together at the table, hands occasionally brushing, drawing strength from each other's presence. "We should try to rest," Nathan said finally. "Take watches through the night." Julia agreed, but when they settled onto the bearskin rug before the fire, neither seemed inclined to sleep. Instead, they held each other close, speaking softly of inconsequential things, favorite memories, childhood dreams, the first time each had seen the ocean. When Julia finally drifted off, Nathan remained awake, watching the play of firelight on her features. He memorized every detail: the curve of her lips, the faint freckles across her nose, the way her lashes rested against her cheeks. Whatever happened in the days to come, he wanted this image seared into his soul. It was near midnight when Nathan heard the soft crunch of snow under boots, too deliberate to be an animal. He gently shook Julia awake, pressing a finger to his lips in warning. "They're here," he whispered, barely audible. "Get behind the table we overturned. Stay low." Julia moved silently, her earlier training evident in her calm precision. Nathan positioned himself near the window, rifle ready, and peered cautiously through a gap in the shutters. At first, he saw nothing in the moonlit yard. Then shadows separated from the darkness, men moving with practiced stealth toward the cabin. He counted 4, then 5, spreading out to surround the small building. 5 outside, he breathed to Julia. Armed. Blackwood, she mouthed back. Nathan shook his head. He couldn't make out faces in the darkness. A voice suddenly called from the yard, artificially friendly. Hello, the house. Anyone home? Nathan and Julia exchanged glances. He shook his head slightly better to let them think the place was empty. Come on now, the voice continued, harder now. We seen the smoke from your chimney. Know you're in there. Just want to talk is all. When there was still no response, the man's tone changed entirely. Elias is losing patience, Mrs. O'Connor. You wouldn't want that now, would you? Julia's sharp intake of breath was the only sign of her fear. Nathan moved to her side, squeezing her hand reassuringly before returning to his position. Last chance, the voice called. Come out peaceful-like and maybe your mountain man lives. Otherwise. The threat hung in the air. Nathan made a swift decision. I'm coming out, he shouted. Hold your fire. To Julia he whispered urgently when I engage them, head for the root cellar. Trapdoors under the rug in my room, lock yourself in. No, Julia hissed. I won't leave you. Julia, please, no. Her voice was steel. We face this together. Remember. There was no time to argue. Nathan nodded once, then moved to the door, rifle at the ready. I'm coming out unarmed, he called. Don't shoot. Cautiously, he opened the door, hands raised to shoulder height, though he'd tucked his revolver into the back of his waistband, hidden by his coat. 5 men stood in the yard, heavily armed and hard-faced. The one in the center, tall and lean with a cruel mouth beneath a neat mustache, stepped forward. Where is she? He demanded without preamble. No one here but me, Nathan replied evenly. Lost, are you? The man's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. Don't play dumb, Sinclair, we know she's here, the banker's widow, Julia O'Connor. Nathan's heart sank at the use of his name. They'd done their research. Don't know who you're talking about. The man sighed dramatically. Elias said you might be difficult. He turned to his companions. Check the barn, the outbuildings, she's here somewhere. 2 men peeled off to follow orders. The leader turned back to Nathan. I'm Morris Blackwood, by the way, Elias's brother. He sends his regards. Where is Elias? Nathan asked, trying to buy time to understand what they were facing. Morris smiled thinly. Around. He likes to make an entrance. His eyes flicked past Nathan to the cabin. Why don't we continue this conversation inside? Getting cold out here. Before Nathan could refuse, the door opened behind him and Julia stepped onto the porch, shotgun steady in her hands. That's far enough, she said, her voice remarkably calm. The next man who moves gets a belly full of buckshot. Morris's expression shifted from surprise to delight. Mrs. O'Connor, there you are. Elias will be so pleased. We've come a long way to find you. Tell your men to drop their weapons, Julia ordered, ignoring his familiar tone. Morris laughed. I don't think so, dear lady. You see, while you've been hiding in this charming hovel, we've been quite busy. Made some new friends in the territory. Influential friends. As if on cue, the sound of approaching horses filled the night. Nathan tensed, expecting reinforcements for the Blackwoods. Instead, to his shock, Sheriff Roy Dawson rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 deputies. Roy. Nathan called, relief flooding through him. Thank God you're here. These men are here on legitimate business. The sheriff cut him off, his voice flat and unfamiliar. Step aside, Nate. Nathan stared in disbelief as Dawson dismounted and moved to stand beside Morris Blackwood. What are you doing, Roy? My job. The sheriff wouldn't meet his eyes. There's a warrant for Mrs. O'Connor's arrest. Obstruction of justice in Chicago. These gentlemen are authorized to transport her back to Illinois. That's a lie, Julia said, her voice shaking now. They murdered my husband. I testified against them. Not how I heard it, Dawson replied. Papers say you helped your lover rob your husband's bank, then blamed it on these men when things went wrong. Nathan felt sick. "You know that's not true, Roy. You're better than this. Whatever they're paying you, enough." Morris interrupted. "Sheriff, do your duty, arrest the woman, and let's be on our way." Dawson finally looked at Nathan, and in his eyes was a mixture of shame and resolve. "I'm sorry, Nate. Times are hard. Man's got to look out for himself." "By selling your badge," Nathan spat. "By helping murderers." The sheriff's hand moved to his gun. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Nathan's mind raced, calculating odds, looking for options. 5 Blackwood men plus Dawson and his 2 deputies, 8 against 2. Terrible odds, but they had the cabin for cover if they could get back inside. He was about to make a move when a new voice rang out from the darkness. "Well, well, the gang's all here." A tall figure on horseback emerged from the tree line, Elias Blackwood himself, unmistakable with his silver-streaked dark hair and the distinctive scar that ran from eye to jaw. Unlike his men, he wore fine clothes beneath his heavy coat, looking more like a businessman than an outlaw. "Mrs. O'Connor," he called, tipping his hat with mocking courtesy. "You've led us on quite a chase. Very inconsiderate after all we've been through together." Julia's shotgun never wavered. "We've been through nothing together, Mr. Blackwood, except that I watched you murder my husband in cold blood." Elias dismounted gracefully, handing his reins to one of the deputies. "Details, my dear. Ancient history." His cold eyes shifted to Nathan. "And you must be the heroic Mr. Sinclair. I've heard so much about you from our mutual friend, the sheriff." Nathan said nothing, his attention divided between the various threats surrounding them, looking for any opening. "I'll make this simple," Elias continued, all pretense of charm vanishing. "Mrs. O'Connor comes with us. She signs a statement recanting her testimony, clearing our names officially. Then perhaps we let her live." His gaze hardened. "As for you, Sinclair, that depends entirely on how cooperative you are in the next few minutes." "She's not going anywhere with you," Nathan said quietly. Elias sighed dramatically. "Heroic but foolish. Sheriff, arrest them both." As Dawson moved forward, hand on his gun, Nathan made his decision. In one fluid motion, he drew the hidden revolver and fired not at Dawson or the Blackwoods, but at the lantern hanging from the porch beam. The lantern exploded in a shower of glass and burning oil, creating instant chaos. Nathan grabbed Julia and pulled her back into the cabin as bullets splintered the doorframe around them. They slammed the door shut, Nathan throwing the heavy bar into place just as the first bodies crashed against it from outside. "The back window," Nathan gasped, pulling Julia toward his bedroom. "We need to get to the horses." They had just reached the bedroom when the front window shattered, and a flaming torch sailed through, landing on the bearskin rug. The dry fur caught immediately, flames leaping toward the wooden walls. "They're burning us out," Julia cried, grabbing what few possessions she could. Nathan was already working to pry open the back window, which they'd boarded up earlier. "Hurry!" Outside, they could hear Elias Blackwood shouting orders. "Watch the back. Don't let them escape." The boards finally gave way, and Nathan helped Julia through the narrow opening. The drop was only a few feet, but she landed awkwardly, crying out in pain. Nathan followed quickly, rifle in hand, and found her struggling to stand, her ankle clearly injured. "I can't run," she gasped. "Go, get help." "Not leaving you," Nathan said firmly, lifting her into his arms. He darted for the cover of the woodpile as shots rang out behind them. They crouched there, temporarily hidden as the cabin began to burn in earnest, illuminating the yard with dancing orange light. Nathan assessed their situation grimly. The barn was too far to reach without being seen, and Julia couldn't run. The canyon where they'd hidden the horses was their best hope, but it meant crossing open ground. "Listen to me," he whispered urgently. I'm going to create a diversion. When I do, you crawl for the tree line there." He pointed to a stand of pines about 50 yards away. "Stay low, use the shadows, I'll meet you there." Julia clutched his arm. "What kind of diversion?" "Nathan, don't trust me," he said, kissing her quickly. "Just be ready to move." Before she could protest further, Nathan took aim at the sheriff's horse, still tethered near the burning cabin, and fired. The animal reared in pain and terror, breaking free and charging through the yard, creating instant confusion among the men. "Now!" Nathan hissed, and Julia began dragging herself toward the trees while he provided covering fire. The Blackwood men scattered for cover, returning fire wildly in the chaotic light of the burning cabin. Nathan kept shooting, methodically changing position to make himself a harder target, drawing attention away from Julia's painfully slow progress. He was so focused on her that he almost missed Morris Blackwood flanking him. A bullet grazed Nathan's shoulder, spinning him around. He fired back instinctively, catching Morris in the chest. The man fell without a sound. The momentary victory was short-lived. As Nathan turned back toward Julia, he saw one of the deputies spot her crawling form and take aim. "No!" Nathan roared, throwing himself forward, firing repeatedly. The deputy went down, but not before getting off a shot of his own. Julia cried out, clutching her side, but continued dragging herself toward the tree line. She was almost there when Elias himself emerged from the shadows directly in her path. "Going somewhere, Mrs. O'Connor?" he asked, leveling his pistol at her head. Nathan froze, his rifle trained on Blackwood, but the distance was too great, the shot too risky with Julia so close. "Drop your weapon, Sinclair," Elias called. "Or she dies right now." Nathan's mind raced desperately. If he surrendered, they would both die. If he fired, he might hit Julia. If he did nothing. The decision was taken from him when Julia, summoning strength from some deep reserve, lunged upward with a concealed knife, the same one Nathan had seen her use countless times to cut vegetables in the kitchen. It sank deep into Elias Blackwood's thigh, and he screamed in pain and fury, staggering backward. Nathan didn't hesitate. He fired 3 rapid shots, catching Blackwood in the chest and throat. The outlaw leader fell, twitching, beside Julia. In the sudden silence, Nathan rushed to Julia's side, heart pounding with fear at the blood staining her clothing. "How bad?" he gasped, helping her into the cover of the trees. "Not deep," she assured him, though her face was pale with pain. "Just a graze. My ankle's worse." Nathan tore strips from his shirt to bind her wounds, constantly alert for sounds of pursuit. "We need to get to the canyon, to the horses." "What about the others? The sheriff?" "Gone or hiding," Nathan said grimly. "But they won't stay gone for long. Can you ride?" Julia nodded determinedly. "Help me up." With Nathan supporting most of her weight, they made their way slowly through the forest toward the hidden canyon. Every step was agony for Julia, but she refused to stop or slow their pace, aware of the deadly danger still behind them. It took nearly an hour to reach the horses, which were restless but unharmed. Nathan helped Julia mount Willow, the gentlest of his 3 horses, before climbing onto Rusty himself. The third horse, a sturdy pack horse named Bear, he loaded with what few supplies they'd managed to salvage. "Where will we go?" Julia asked as they urged the horses deeper into the mountains, away from the burning remains of the ranch. "I know a place," Nathan said. "Old trapping cabin about 20 miles north. Remote. We can hole up there, tend your wounds properly." "And then what?" Nathan reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "Then we start over. Together." Despite the pain, the loss, the uncertainty ahead, Julia smiled, a true smile that reached her eyes and warmed Nathan's heart. "Together," she agreed. They rode through the night, moving steadily higher into the mountains. Behind them, the glow of the burning cabin gradually faded, but neither looked back. Their path led forward now, into a future neither could have imagined just weeks ago when a cowboy discovered a woman sleeping in his stable and offered her a warmer place to rest. Dawn was breaking as they reached the old trapping cabin, nestled in a protected valley surrounded by towering pines. It was small and rustic, but solid, a place to heal, to plan, to begin again. As Nathan helped Julia dismount and carried her inside, he made a silent vow. Whatever came next, whatever challenges they faced, he would never again let her face them alone. In finding each other, they had found something rare and precious, a love worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth building a new life around. And that, Nathan knew with bone-deep certainty, was worth everything they had lost. 5 years later, the valley lay bathed in the golden light of a summer evening. The new Sinclair ranch house stood proud and welcoming where the old cabin had once been, larger and sturdier, but built with the same care and attention to detail. A vegetable garden flourished nearby, and the expanded stable housed twice as many horses as before. On the wide front porch, Julia Sinclair sat in a rocking chair, her hand resting protectively on the gentle swell of her belly, their second child, due when the first snows of winter arrived. Their 3-year-old son, Daniel, played in the yard with a puppy, his laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Nathan emerged from the stable, smiling at the sight of his family. 5 years had added a few lines to his face, a touch of silver at his temples, but his step was still vigorous, his eyes clear and content as they met his wife's across the yard. They had rebuilt everything, not just the ranch, but their lives. After that night of violence and fire, they had stayed in the mountains until Julia's wounds healed, then traveled west to Oregon Territory, where they were married by a circuit preacher in a small ceremony with strangers as witnesses. With the reward money for Elias Blackwood claimed anonymously through a trusted lawyer in Portland, they had eventually returned to Montana, but to a different valley, far from Bonner's Ferry and the memories of betrayal and loss. Here, they were known simply as the Sinclairs, hard-working ranchers with a talent for breeding fine horses. The past never fully released its grip. Julia still woke sometimes from nightmares of fire and pursuit, and Nathan occasionally found himself scanning the horizon for threats, but those moments grew rarer with each passing season. As Nathan reached the porch, Julia rose to meet him, her smile as bright and genuine as the day he'd first seen it over a chess game during a snowstorm. "How are my girls?" he asked, one hand gently caressing her belly while the other cupped her cheek. "We're fine," Julia assured him, leaning into his touch. "Though your daughter has been practicing her kicking all afternoon, I think she'll be as stubborn as her father." Nathan laughed, pulling her close. "Poor child, having both of us for parents. She doesn't stand a chance at being reasonable." Julia's arms wrapped around his waist, her head resting against his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Their life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was rich with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting together. They had known darkness and survived it, emerging stronger for having faced it side by side. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Nathan and Julia stood together on the porch of the home they had created, watching their son play in the golden light. Whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it as they had faced everything since that cold autumn day when a cowboy discovered her sleeping in his stable and offered her something warmer than hay, a chance at love, a chance at home, a chance at a life neither had dared to imagine was possible. And that chance, seized with both hands and held tight through fire and fear and faith, had become the greatest blessing either could have hoped for. Not just survival, but a life truly worth living together.